All right, guys, we're back together for another daily devotion. And man, Paul has gotten a whole lot of issues and problems surrounding his bold and courageous witness for Christ. He's been falsely accused. He's been trying to get killed by the Jews. That stopped. The Romans were going to flog him. That has stopped because Paul says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. He's now in prison. Now there's a plot to kill Paul. That plot has been found out. And as a result of that, they have to send Paul away to Felix, the governor. And so that's exactly where we pick up. And we're only doing a handful of verses today. So it's only 23 to verses 25. And it's chapter 23 of the book of Acts. And it says this. It says, then he called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready, 200 soldiers and 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter to this effect. Now, this is Claudius Lysias, who is overseeing Paul right now, who's going to send him to Felix. He's in Jerusalem. He's got to go to Caesarea, so he's got to go north and then to the west. Caesarea is on the coast, and he's going to give about half of all that he's in charge of, Lysias here, to make sure that Paul gets there safely. That's how serious he took this. And it's quite amazing as I look at kind of just the details of what's happening here, to see the seriousness of Lysias, who is protecting Paul. He really, we have to just see the sovereign hand in God in this moment. Because I would just tend to think like, okay, it's Paul. It's like, just send him out, send him with like 10 people, and he can get there safe and go by night. But he's sending half of all that he's in charge of to make sure Paul will get to Felix in a safe manner. And we can see that God's behind this, because if we know how the book of Acts is going to play out, and if you don't, you'll soon have it, you'll get to see this beautiful moment where Paul is going to be able to demonstrate and preach the gospel to this governor. So God is sparing Paul's life wherever he's going. God's already told Paul, you'll be imprisoned and you will suffer persecution for boldly proclaiming the gospel. And he knows that it's eventually going to get him to Rome. And Paul will eventually appeal to Caesar and get to Rome. And when Paul's in Rome, he's going to write 4 of the most beautiful prison epistles that we have in the scriptures today as a result of this whole journey. So I think sometimes as we get kind of wrapped up in Paul's story, we just go, man, if Paul could have made a different decision or didn't go this way, like the whole narrative would be changed. But we have to realize that this is in the perfect will of the Lord, all things that are happening to Paul, which is a great reminder to some of us who might be going through some tests or some trials or some suffering. And I know many in our church are right now, that none of this is happening in your life. None of the suffering, none of the tests, none of the trials are outside the sovereign hand of the Lord. And so you're in a unique predicament for your faith to shine, for God to show you something, to reveal something, or for God to bring even greater glory to what he's doing in and through your life. And for many times for the saints, it means going through tests and trials and sufferings to get there. And so Paul is going through tests and trials and suffering, but he's like, willingly, I'll go for it. This is kind of like those missionaries that enter into some of the toughest places in the world going, I know that if I go into this location, it could mean my life. And I'm willing to lay my life down for the cause of Christ. They go in there and God uses them to do some of the most phenomenal things that has ever happened on this planet. And it's the same thing for Paul. Everywhere that the Lord is going to take Paul, he's going to have a chance to share the gospel. He's going to share the gospel eventually in Rome. We're going to get these great scriptures that will be written by Paul when he's in prison. And we see the whole big scope picture that is happening for future generations and in that moment for God to be greatly glorified. But if we just got wrapped up in the moment of what's happening in Paul, it could seem like, oh man, you can become pretty downcast. And it could be the same for you in your moment of your pain or of your suffering or your circumstance. Everything is so focused in that moment. You could become maybe depressed or maybe downcast, and to step back and go, God has a big scope picture on all that's happening in my life. And I must remain faithful. I must keep my eyes focused upon Christ. And I am going to use this to make sure that Christ, it looks beautiful to all those in and around me, to make Christ be glorified in and through my life. And I will say this, friends, the people that bring the most sometimes beautiful witness, and maybe the best way to say it, for Christ, are those who are going through suffering to remain faithful and steadfast, joyful in the midst of suffering, really makes other people around you go, what is wrong with that person? Or what does that person have that lets them still walk with such a peace and with such a joy? And it gives you so many opportunities to share the gospel. So let us use these opportunities for the sake of Christ. And then know as well, you're not being shamed, you're not being punished, you're being used by the Lord for his glory. God bless you guys. Until next time.